let's hit these questions right off the top. Still unclear on how you make sure your images are focused in the water while the housing is covering it.
Not sure how to answer that one because there was just a 30-minute video that explained all of that. So what I would say is rewatch it because that's not something I could even remotely explain. But a synopsis of that would be still unclear in how you focus when your housing is covering it. Well, just to reiterate, 2 types of focusing, wet and dry. Dry is when there is no water on the lens. You do that by applying grease to it, the water beads off. Very simple. You can focus, autofocus through the lens. Wet is when your housing, your port, is meant to be covered by water. You do this because you are not focusing. You only can do that when you're shooting a wide angle lens, 15 millimeter to 35 millimeter. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah. Were you guys able to watch those videos and do that? I just want to make sure because this is like, that's the reason you have to have these things showing people demonstrating with a source of water in it because it's almost impossible to explain verbally. You have to really see it. But yeah, it's a tricky process, and I would anybody who really does want to go in the water, I would definitely recommend rewatching that section a couple of times so that you get a very clear understanding of how that works and what it's meant to do. Because really, it's 2 different types of shooting for a multitude of different scenarios. And you kind of need to pick the scenario that you're going to be shooting and what you plan to shoot, and then kind of apply it from there. So, yeah. Cool.
How long are you usually out there to get a shot like that?
It all depends. sometimes the light is only good for that first 15 minutes of the day. So you'll be out in the water, 5 minutes before the sun rises, and shooting about 10 to 15 minutes after that, and you're done. Sometimes the surf only lasts so long. So it all depends on what you're shooting. If you're shooting a photograph of a boat or a yacht in the water or someone swimming or whatever, I mean, it totally depends. I guess for me, I tend to try and shoot as long as the light's good or as long as the conditions last. So there's been sessions that are 6 hours in the water that are pretty brutal, and there's sessions that are like 25 minutes, but you typically, if you're getting your housing already and you're getting out there, you're trying to get, as much as you can, so yeah.
Cool. Recap on the settings for shooting in water. Are you shooting in shutter priority? Did I miss what mode he's shooting in for these scenarios?
Yeah, sorry for going over that one kind of quickly. The typical settings that I use, it depends on the housing, you guys keep in mind. If you're using one of those sport housings that doesn't have a lot of buttons, you're limited because you want to go into the water with all your settings set. If you have a housing like this, where every single button is there, I can literally turn my camera on when I get in the water. So there's no rush to make your settings until you get there. Typically, my typical settings are TV mode, shutter speed priority. I'm putting my shutter between 800 and 1,000 or 800 and 1,200, depends on how bright it is. ISO 200, and then my f-stop is obviously exposing based on my shutter. And the important part is obviously the burst priority mode. And I'm also, one thing that's important is I'm usually putting my exposure dot at the center exposure. Meaning, you have a multitude of different exposure modes. I'm putting it at center. Why am I doing that? Because if I am shooting in a tube, in a barrel, for example, it's extremely bright out, and then all of a sudden everything gets darker and darker and darker and darker and darker. So you have to make sure you're exposing for that one person, or else your exposure might be over here where, I'll try and find a version this is kind of the, I'm not sure if I have one in this little portfolio here, but it's super crucial that basically the subject is kind of lit up, right? So I think it's always important where, depending on what you're shooting, if you're further away, like in a scenario like this, where you can have, it's okay for this all to be even, but if I was shooting right here looking in, it would be much darker inside there, right? So I would need a little more open up exposure. And it's really tough, you guys, to get a perfect exposure when you're in the water and when you're shooting like that, right? It's a very tricky thing, and this is kind of why it takes just a lot of trial and error. Sometimes you're not gonna really get what you think you are, or something like that. It just kind of happens as it goes. So, do you guys have any other questions on the water housing scenarios, on when to shoot what? And this is kind of the time to answer those. And there's absolutely no dumb questions, but I just want to make sure that everything's kind of understood.